friends, and he was a different person than you know. And there were basically three big phases of Steve Jobs' life, you know, during the time I knew him. But this early phase, we would joke, we'd go to concerts together. I showed him all my Bob Dylan liner notes because I had albums, and Steve had no money, and that was good. I had a job as an engineer. Right out of high school, I could always get a job. I was designing the hottest product of the time, the HP scientific calculators, and I did not have a college degree. They interviewed me and just an instant offer to work for them. So I had it easy, but Steve had like no real abilities or good grades or any of that kind of stuff. He would just go around and take little jobs trying to sell stuff, usually electronic parts. And because he had no money, every once in a while he'd come back into town. I drove him to college in Oregon, and he'd come back into town and he'd see what the latest thing I built for fun was. I started building video games, and actually it started with little devices that could make free phone calls called blue boxes. And those, we had a lot of fun with those, but Steve Jobs would always say, how can he turn it into some money? And he'd find somebody that would buy a few, and we'd make a few $100s or a few $1,000s and split it. This was every year that the computer was actually about the 5th year along. We've had a partnership of selling my stuff for 5 years. So when we started Apple, all we were doing was formalize it and saying, the two of us, you know, we'll have our own company. Whether we make money or not didn't matter. We didn't think we would make money. But we just do it on the side because I had a job and Steve just didn't need any money at all. He lived with his parents. So it wasn't, I mean, the risk, we had to put a few $100s in. You do what you have. You have no money, no savings accounts, no rich relatives, and we only had a few $100s each we could barely come up with, and I had to sell my most valuable possession, which was my Hewlett-Packard scientific calculator, and we put a few $100 in and started this thing on the side, but I loved my company, Hewlett-Packard. I would never, ever do something behind their back. I would never lose my job at Hewlett-Packard. It was an engineering company building products for engineers, and I was engineer for life. I would never want to move up the org chart because I love building things that actually work. So Hewlett-Packard turned me down 5 times for the personal computer, the way we envisioned it, a fun device for the home, because they only could see boring devices for engineers.
So how did you stay innovative? You know, that first 5 years, new products, new ideas, was that really out of your head, or did you customize?
Well, no, those 5 years, no. I was just a person who was such a geek, I'd never have a chance of a girlfriend or a wife or parties at night. So when I finished my engineering work in the daytime at Hewlett-Packard, come home, watch Star Trek, have a TV dinner, and then I get to work on my own designs. I mean, I saw Pong in a bowling alley. Oh my gosh. I know everything about analog television from my electronics days. I was a ham radio operator in 6th grade, and then I knew everything digital possible. I could design anything with chips and use fewer chips than anyone else, so I built my own Pong. And Steve turned that into basically a job for himself at Atari, even though he didn't really design. He never was an engineer or a programmer. He kind of felt guilty about it. Even in his last days, he talked to me and I said, no. Having the marketing abilities, understanding people, what they want, what engineers you can believe, being able to manage, that's much more valuable.
So is that sort of how you split your roles? You know, you were the innovator and the...
Oh yeah, I would design all these things, and then he would usually be up in Oregon living on a hippie commune type thing. But he'd come into town, and one time actually he was working for Atari for a while. He took my Pong game down and got hired there, but he told him he would design a game, but he couldn't design anything. That was the problem. He knew electronics a bit, he knew how to solder, and he knew how to look at a circuit, follow it. He was, on a step of a technician, but he wasn't like an engineer. So he came to me, he says, we gotta build this thing. He needed money to buy his way into the hippie commune. He says, you want to design this game for Atari, a one-player Pong game. And Nolan Bushnell, the owner of Atari, wants it. And I said, oh gosh, it would just fulfill my heart to build a game that young people are going to actually play.